Hello students, welcome to the lecture on Arts of Listening, and after this lecture we will be able to learn the following objectives. Discuss good listening for improved communications, understand meaning of listening, define how to understand yourself as a listener, describe nature of listening, explain the importance of listening, understand the barriers to effective listening, describe principle of listening. Let's start with the introduction to arts of listening. Sound is so much an expression of situation, a time and place, personality and environment. Sound exists as information, it exists as music and noise, and it exists as an affirmation that there is life when its vibrations move between us as shouts, cries, laughter or speech and fulfill a communication. A listening art will encourage in students of all ages a capacity for listening that is creative, patient and discerning. Listening as a fundamental communication skill is often only developed secondarily as a means to some other goal. Typically, teachers as well as parents and other authority figures demand of students as they listen, and so listening takes on negative connotations, becomes oppressive and encourages resistance. Is demanding listening as unreasonable as demanding that a student who has not learned to read go ahead and read anyway. Listening arts aspires more to encourage willful, thoughtful and imaginative listening, that is, a literacy of the ear, than it does to make artists. Audio journals. Even the most restless listener will grant unusual attention to the sound of his/her own voice. The audio journal is a way students may document their relationship to and so become more conscious of sound in their daily lives. Audio journaling may take place in a notebook or a book of blank paper. Such a diary might begin with a vocabulary one associates with sound and listening. Play students recordings of such phenomena as thunderstorms, penguins, rainforests, or jet engines and ask them to describe in words, spoken or written, and pictures and what it is they imagine they are hearing. Vary this by playing students strange music and encourage them to draw more abstractedly to represent the music. Have them describe how the sounds make them feel. Vary this when away from the classroom by asking students to close their eyes and listen to the sounds of a specific location, or make sounds next to their ears using small objects concealed in the hand, stones, coins, paper and leaves. With a portable recording device, a listener may record his or her thoughts, feelings or observations with immediacy and even indulge impulses privately. Good listening for improved communications. People engage in various ways to communicate. These days there are emails, blogs, SMS messages, the mobile phone, as well as the good old-fashioned way of face-to-face. Often though, communication leads to arguments and disagreements. One of the ways to reduce this from occurring is to work on improving listening skills. Effective communication. Communication is not only about speaking. To be effective in communication, one must have good listening skills. It can be difficult to be an effective communicator when the listening skills are lacking. Listening skills are essential in gathering information during the communication process. Particularly in relationships, good listening skills are essential to avoid conflict and enhance the relationship. Why people do not listen? It is easier to be a poor listener than a good listener. Good listening skills take work. Often people are poor listeners because they think what they have to say is better or more important and thus cannot wait to make their point. The day has been a busy one and the person does not want to listen to someone else tell of their troubles. The mind is closed. The message is interpreted using the listener's experience as opposed to trying to understand a concept from someone else's perspective. Conclusions are jumped to before the speaker has finished. Symptoms of poor listening skills. During conversation, one person will finish the sentence of the other person. A person does not let the other person finish the sentence and cuts in with words such as yeah, I know, or yes, but. One party carries on during what they were doing before they were spoken to, no eye contact. Strategies to improve listening skills. Improving listening skills will not happen overnight, but some things one can try to include. Take a deep breath before responding is a way to show that some thought is being put into what has been said. One should not listen with the intent of responding, but with an intent of understanding. Summarizing what has been said can let the other party know an attempt has been made to listen. How to be a better listener. Most of us are acquainted with the old riddle that goes, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is in the area to hear it, does it make a noise? From a communication point of view, the answer must be a definite no. Even though there are sounds, waves, there is no sound because no one perceives it. For communication to take place, there must be both a sender and a receiver. The goal to improve listening skills takes us to what Saul Gellerman said. The sender, to be certain that his message will be accepted by the receiver, must be prepared to let the receiver influence him. He must even be prepared to let the receiver alter or modify the message in ways that make it more acceptable to the receiver. Otherwise, it may not be understood, or it may not be accepted, or it may simply be given lip service and ignored. This places the responsibility for good communications squarely on the shoulders of both the sender and the receiver. Each of us plays the roles of sender and receiver many times each day. Thus, it is important to learn to play each role well.
Learning to be a good listener is an important life skill. There are many ways to be a good listener.
First, a good listener makes eye contact. Making eye contact is polite and shows that you are paying attention.
Second, a good listener is patient. There's nothing worse than talking to someone who seems like they are in a hurry.
Third, a good listener does not interrupt. Always let the person you are speaking to finish their thought. Don't move the topic of the conversation away from them. Your personal experiences can wait.
Next, a good listener asks questions. Asking questions shows that you are listening and actually interested.
Fifth, a good listener tries to relate to the topic. You can say yeah when you agree or cool when something they're saying is cool.
6, use positive body language. This makes the speaker feel more comfortable.
7th, a good listener does not check his or her phone while somebody else is talking. That's just rude.
Also, a good listener is open-minded. Try not to have all the crazy opinions, but try to understand where the person is coming from.
In addition, a good listener shows that he or she cares. Show empathy for what the other person is sharing to make them feel that you understand them.
Finally, a good listener remembers what you've said. If you remember what they say and ask them about it later, they will think you are a caring friend.
Remember that good speakers aren't always the best listeners. If you follow these suggestions, you'll be on your way to being a fantastic listener.
Let's now talk about listening. Listening is probably the most valuable skill a person can bring to an interpersonal relationship. It is also possible the rarest. In ordinary social discourse, the highest form of compliment is paid by carefully listening to the one who is speaking. Listening to what a person is saying helps that person's self-esteem and is therapeutic in it. Sympathetic listening helps others grow even when the conversation does not include decisions. Many of us know a careful listener. People visit and come away saying, "What a fine person she is. She is so interesting that I could talk to her all day." Such persons are not necessarily spinning out of a fascinating stream of conversation. They are usually sensitive, somewhat shy, and talk about 10% of the time. 90% of the time is spent listening and making others feel important. Skilled, careful listening is not acquired by accident. Until the habit is firmly learned, the only way to listen with understanding is to make a conscious effort. Most of our daily chit-chat is hardly attended to at all. Most do not accept our hearers to remember it. Shared meaning. Shared meaning is a listening procedure that completes the cycle involved in listening. It is used when one person has a serious concern, when there is a problem. It is not meant to apply to day-to-day chit-chat. The three-part process involved in shared meaning are: the person with a concern expresses a desire to talk about something important. He expresses the concern as clearly as possible, speaking only for himself. Then he asks the listener to report back what has been heard. For example, Jack says to his wife, "Maria, I want to talk about our arrangements for when the baby comes. I do not think we ought to have either of our mothers this time. I do not get along with my mother very well, and it would cause conflict to have only yours. So I have talked to a temporary housekeeper. Okay, what do you hear me saying?" The listener responds by reporting back in her own words what has just been heard. Maria answers, "Since you and your mother do not get along well, and since it may cause a conflict to have only my mother, you're suggesting that we have a temporary housekeeper instead." The original speaker then acknowledges that the listener has the message as it was intended, or corrects the listener's response without changing the original message. Be sure to note that shared meaning does not mean there is an agreement. When shared meaning is used, any disagreement will be on clear one. Moving on to the next topic, let's now briefly discuss the good qualities of listener. We communicate with ourselves when we think, when one makes decisions, and when we engage in any type of communication activity. The most effective listeners not only listen to themselves but are also sensitive to how their behavior affects others. In fact, two of the most potent ways in which learning can be facilitated is through continuous self-monitoring and obtaining constructive feedback from classmates and instructor, because we will be depending on our peers to assist in learning process. Providing feedback becomes a central responsibility. First, however, we highlight the importance of listening to self and then go to examine the role self-monitoring and feedback play in facilitating listening development. Self-listening. Self-listening influences all other relationships. The process of listening to oneself is integrally linked to the process of listening to others. This involves listening to our self-images as well as our thoughts and feelings. Only when we listen well to ourselves and recognize our values, beliefs, prejudices and needs can we listen to others with insight and sensitivity. Awareness of our own thinking process is prerequisite to changing or improving behavior. Deliberate self-reflection guides in monitoring those mental listening processes that are inaccessible to others and enables to select appropriate strategies as we pursue a specific listening goal. Recently, self-listening has emerged as a topic in leadership development. In numerous guidelines created to prepare future leaders, knowing self is the very top of the priority list. As one author emphasizes, no tool can help the leader who lacks self-knowledge. The acquisition of such knowledge requires self-listening. Self-monitoring. Self-monitoring is a special kind of social sensitivity. It refers to awareness of how the behavior affects another person within the context of a specific interaction, and importantly, the degree to which we choose to modify our response based on that knowledge. High self-monitoring, the ability to access a situation accurately, determine an appropriate response, and then modify the behavior in light of that knowledge, has been suggested as prerequisite to effective communication. Self-monitoring as self-observation and self-control guided by situational cues to social appropriateness. Clearly, however, self-monitoring has significant implications for listening. If we are a high self-monitor, we are concerned with social appropriateness and are particularly sensitive to the expressions and self-presentations of others, a characteristic called emotional negligence. Nonverbal cues such as voice quality, body posture, touch, and the use of space play an important role in shaping the high self-monitor's impressions. Information about an individual's status, feelings, attitudes, and the nature of the interaction expressed through nonverbal behavior is used by this high self-monitor as a guide for modifying her own behavior. High self-monitors adjust their own responses and nonverbal behaviors according to the demands of the particular situation. Constructive feedback. Although communication sensitivity is essential to effective listening, our best guesses regarding how we behave is perceived or what our partner is feeling may not always be accurate. As one communication scholar explains, our perceptions of the other person are grounded in permanent uncertainty. This is particularly true when we communicate through distance technologies and with individuals whose background and experiences are very different from own. If we are really interested in improving our listening behavior, clear and direct feedback is essential. Information sharing with our classmates provides everyone with opportunities to check their personal perceptions against their partner's impressions. Now we shall discuss the nature of listening. Listening is one of the subjects studied in the field of language arts and the discipline of conversation analysis. There is primary or initiatory listening as one enters the world for the first time. What a rush that must be as the ears unplug and air pushes in. Primary listening gives us relationship to place and continues to unfold through one's lifetime, literally and figuratively, with more or less intensity depending on the individual and culture. There is secondary listening or remembered listening. If we remember we are conscious, there is short-term and long-term consciousness. In any case, consciousness is latent and without memory, however late it might be in manifesting, there is no consciousness. There is focused listening where attention is directed to communication and learning to listen for specific sounds and to repeat them. There is global listening as attention is open to the field of undifferentiated, fluctuating sounds. As focal listening gains in importance, global or primary listening loses the foreground and only returns in initiatory or unfamiliar situations such as entering a room full of people speaking a foreign language. As sound refined, as language and communication intensifies, primary listening recedes.
Do you know the one key to becoming a great conversationalist? The key is to pause before replying. A short pause of 3 to 5 seconds after a person stops talking is a very classy thing to do in a conversation. When you pause, you accomplish 3 goals simultaneously. First, you avoid running the risk of interrupting if the other person is just catching his or her breath before continuing. The second benefit is that you show the other person that you are giving careful consideration to his or her words by not jumping in with your own comments at the earliest opportunity. The third benefit of pausing in conversation is that you will actually hear the other person better. His or her words will soak into a deeper level of your mind, and you will understand what he or she is really saying with greater clarity. By pausing, you mark yourself as a brilliant conversationalist. Another way to become a great conversationalist is to question for clarification. Never assume that you understand what the other person is saying or trying to say. Instead, if you have any doubt at all, ask, "How do you mean?" Or, "How do you mean exactly?" And then just pause and wait. This is the most powerful question I've ever learned for guiding and controlling a conversation. It's almost impossible not to answer this question. When you ask, "How do you mean?" the other person cannot stop himself or herself from answering more extensively. You can then follow up with other open-ended questions and keep the conversation rolling along. The third way to become a great conversationalist is for you to paraphrase the speaker's words in your own words. So after you've nodded and smiled, you can then say, "Well, let me see if I got this right," or "Let me see if I understand you exactly. What you're saying is this," and then you repeat it back in your own words. By paraphrasing the speaker's words, you demonstrate in no uncertain terms that you are genuinely paying attention and making every effort to understand his or her thoughts or feelings. And the wonderful thing is, when you practice effective listening, other people will begin to find you fascinating. They will want to be around you. They will feel relaxed and happy in your presence because when you listen to other people, you make them feel important. The reason why listening is such a powerful tool in developing the art and skill of conversation is because listening builds trust. The more you listen to another person, the more he or she trusts you and believes in you. Listening also builds self-esteem. When you listen attentively to another person, his or her self-esteem will naturally increase. He or she will feel better about themselves. He or she will feel more valuable and more respected. Finally, listening builds self-esteem in the listener. Because your mind can process words at 500 to 600 words per minute, and we can only talk at about 150 words per minute, it takes real effort to keep your attention focused on another person's words. If you do not practice self-discipline in conversation, your mind will wander in 100 different directions. The more you work at paying close attention to what the other person is saying, the more self-disciplined you will become. In other words, by learning to listen well, you actually develop your own character and your own personality.
Now let's talk about the importance of listening. The importance of listening in communication is enormous. People often focus on their speaking ability, believing that good speaking equals good communication. The ability to speak well is a necessary component to successful communication. The ability to listen is equally as important. The importance of listening in communication is often well illustrated when we analyze our listening skills with those closest to us. In particular, referring to our spouse, partner, children, or friends, pay attention to everyday conversations we have with these people with whom we think we communicate well. This is actually quite common, and yet we think we are good communicators. In order to communicate effectively, we have to be able to hear what the other person is saying, not just hear because the acoustics are good or because the other person is speaking in a loud enough tone. It is important that we hear what the person is saying because we have taken the time to actively listen. Listening takes work when it comes to improving our communication. There is no getting around that. When we are listening to music or watching TV, we can certainly let our minds wander. If we want our communication skills to get stronger, it is important that we not daydream in a conversation but instead concentrate fully on what the other person is saying. No doubt this can be difficult. Not every conversation we are in is particularly interesting. If, however, we want to improve these skills, focus is important even when dealing with younger children and teenagers.
In this segment, I'd like to focus on listening, a critical aspect in building all our relationships and ecumenical relationships in particular. We search for Christian unity together and need to listen to one another and to God. Listening is not just hearing. It involves paying attention to the words and the nonverbal messages of our colleague or friend. A distracted presence will not do. Take this from one who is easily distracted. If someone else walks by, I can often lose the direction of the conversation I'm having. This does not advance Christian understanding, at least with the person I'm talking with. I've learned that listening is not just with our ears, it's with our head and our heart. For a successful dialogue, we need to make a personal investment of our whole being. We commit ourselves to the other and to the relationship and make an effort to avoid all distractions, whether external or internal. To listen, we have to be silent, not answering back with our own views, but focusing deeply on the other person and what he or she is saying. This might cause us to change our habits of conversation, There always will be time later to say what we really need to say. Deep listening can lead us to deal with our obstacles. We may have within us resentments or angers or bad experiences or prejudices that impede dialogue. In the course of conversations, these obstacles often surface, and thus we have an opportunity to deal with them. I pray daily that the Holy Spirit will heal my own prejudices. Healing prepares the way for deeper conversation and more profound relationships. Healing may also need to occur on the community level. Pope John Paul II was well known for acknowledging and apologizing for past wrongs done by Catholics. Some Catholics were uncomfortable with his candor and honesty. Some of us had learned when we were young that Catholics had not done wrong and not made mistakes. Acknowledgement of the past can free us to move into the future together. We see this when religious communities revise their textbooks for children to reflect both truth and forgiveness rather than perpetuate past hurts. Our dialogical conversations can lead to mutual understanding. We're looking for the truth together. Thus, we share our beliefs with each other in an honest and forthright way. We listen and we learn. When we listen intently, we may at times hear God speaking to us through our friend, our colleague in dialogue. The good example of the other, their dedication to their prayer and to a life of faith, can be an example for us. Ultimately, ecumenism has to do with our relationships. Attentive listening can bring us closer to one another and closer to Christ.
Now let us discuss the barriers to effective listening. It is common when listening to someone else speak to be formulating a reply whilst the other person is still talking. However, this means that we are not really listening to all that is being said. Even good listeners are often guilty of critically evaluating what is being said before fully understanding the message that the speaker is trying to communicate. The result is that assumptions are made and conclusions reached about the speaker's meaning that might be inaccurate. This and other types of effective listening lead to misunderstandings and a breakdown in communication. Physiological barriers. Hearing impairment. Sometimes poor listening can be traced to hearing deficiencies. However, once these deficiencies are detected, they can usually be treated. Speaking. Thinking rate. According to an estimate, we speak at an average of 125 to 150 words a minute. Our mind, however, can process nearly 500 words per minute. This gives listeners a good deal of spare time, which is often used for mental exertions ranging from daydreaming to thinking about the speaker's hairstyle. Spending this time for analyzing the message would make for better listening. Environmental barriers. Physical distractions, distracting sounds, poor acoustics, and uncomfortable seating arrangements can all hamper effective listening. But then it is not impossible to counter these distractions through concentration. When all attention is focused on what is being said, the other noises take backseat in consciousness. Unless, of course, the noises are too powerful. Message overload. When we are focused to listen to a quick succession of messages, then after a point of our receptivity dulls. We find it gets impossible to listen attentively. Coping with the deluge of information is like juggling. We can keep only a few things going at a time. Now, in the end, let us summarize what we have learnt in this lecture. Listening arts will encourage in students of all ages a capacity for listening that is creative, patient, and discerning. The importance of listening skill to managers has been recognized by industrial firms for some time. The process of listening to oneself is integrally linked to the process of listening to others. This involves listening to our self-images as well as our thoughts and feelings. A focal listening gains in importance. Global or primary listening loses the foreground and only returns in initiatory or unfamiliar situations, such as entering a room full of people speaking a foreign language. The importance of listening in communication is often well illustrated when we analyze our listening skills with those closest to us, in particular referring to our spouse, partner, children, or friends. Good listeners are often guilty of critically evaluating what is being said before fully understanding the message that the speaker is trying to communicate.